Hybrid Cloud Show, episode 32. I'm Aaron.
I'm Gary.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Shane.
Welcome to the show about public cloud, private cloud, and everything in between. Our views here are ours and not those of our employers. So, there was some recent news about Synology and hard drives from third parties that I believe impacted you personally, Gary. Do you want to give us a rundown of what that change was and where you're at?
Yes, so it doesn't impact me immediately, but probably is going to in the next 6 months or so. So this is the story that Synology are only going to be allowing first-party, i.e. Synology vetted hard drives in the 2025 series of Synology NAS products. And this doesn't affect the super low-end ARM NASs, but it does affect anything mid-range and upwards, which sadly are the ones that I tend to buy.
And when you say supported or whatever, does that mean that you're not going to get support from Synology, or does it mean that they aren't going to work when you stick them in the box?
My understanding is that it will flat out refuse to build a pool with non-Synology supported drives. If you have existing drives that you want to move over, that is fine, but that doesn't bode particularly well for me going and replacing drives as they fail, for example. So the way that this affects me is that I have multiple of these Synology units that I've bought over the last 10 to 12 years, I would say. And what my strategy has been is to tear them down to both my on-site and off-site backup locations as and when I've needed an upgrade of the primary NAS. So my primary NAS is currently a DS920, and that is 4 years old. I then have a DS416 Play at my off-site location, which is about 9 years old, and I have a DS215J, which is one of the really low-end 2-bay ARM NAS that sits in my office as just an on-site backup of the most critical data.
So I'm not very familiar with the Synology ecosystem. How do you replicate things between Synologies and all the rest? I'm just trying to figure out how stuck into this ecosystem you are.
So I am fairly stuck into this ecosystem in as much as I use their hyper backup solution to run the backups between sites, and that gives me all of the nice things like versioning, offsite backups, encryption, all that kind of stuff that I would otherwise have to do manually if I were running my own file server. I set this up 9+ years ago because I was incredibly lazy at the time, just wanted something that works. But in fairness, it has been a pretty reliable solution. I've never had a backup that I've been unable to recover from it. So it's something that over the years I've grown to trust.
And how are you doing the networking between these things? Do they just magically find each other if you've logged in or something like that?
So they can do some kind of firewall punching stuff, but I've got all of that turned off. And the two that are on my on-prem network sit in two separate subnets, and they're allowed the relevant ports to do the hyper backup connection between each other. Then the one that is at my offsite backup, I've actually got a site-to-site VPN to that other location. So I stick the IP address in and it just works.
Is the site-to-site done at like the router level or there on the machine?
It's done at the router level. I've experimented with Tailscale on these units before, and I've just found it somewhat unreliable. They have some workarounds suggested on the Tailscale website where you can create a cron job to restart the Tailscale service when certain things happen on the NAS, but that feels a little bit hacky. Given that both of the sites have Unify firewalls anyway, and it is literally 2 clicks in the Unify web interface to go and enable a site-to-site VPN, I just went that route.
Dang, they're expensive, but it's times like that where it's just click button easy. It's all worth it.
It's just like, I want this subnet to be able to talk to this subnet, okay, and it just works. And as you can tell by the fact that I've got 3 of these Synology units, I'm quite a lazy admin for my home network, and I do want something where I can just click button and it work.
So tell me a bit more about how this backup piece actually works, or the replication piece actually works. Is that all effectively just abstracted away? So it's Synology to Synology, and you end up with another copy of your data, another copy of your versions on those other machines?
It is exactly that. It is some kind of proprietary Synology solution that is doing the replication. My NASs are of very different eras in terms of Synology. So some of them are just extended 4 disks, and it puts these backups on the destination into what it calls a backup bundle. But the reality is if you pull the disk out and plug it into a Linux machine, it's just flat files with timestamped directories to look at the different things, and then they're just symlinked back. So that's not a huge issue. Other of my Synologies are ButterFS, but my understanding is that it's not using any of the ButterFS replication stuff because it is just ButterFS with MD RAID on top for the RAID stuff. So it's just doing the same method of file replication. They sit in what Synology call a bundle file or something, and I can just read the file straight off of those disks. I can actually pull the ButterFS disks out, re-import that MD RAID on a machine that I already have, and then see the files. So for all intents and purposes, the actual data is stored on a relatively standard Linux file system. It's just the replication bit that's proprietary.
This new policy of locking down specific hard drives to Synology branded ones, I'm not aware of Synology branded hard drives. Are these just rebrands of existing hard drives with markup of some sort benefiting Synology, I'm assuming?
Yeah, my understanding is they're just white labeled kind of prosumer drives. So I would guess they would be like white labeled WD Reds or something like that. So they're not anything particularly fancy. Synology claim that it's because they've done extensive testing with these drives and they can guarantee that they'll work. Equally, the 3 used helium drives that I have in my existing NAS have been absolutely fine for years. So I don't know what it is that they're trying to prove, but I think we can all guess.
Right. I'm trying to figure out if just sticking with Synology, what that trade-off is. I guess you're going to be paying more for drives and you'll have less choice and you'll not be able to use any of the drives you currently have in whatever new product they provide.
So it's a bit more nuanced than that. But my reason for wanting to look at this now is the DS215, which is the 2014 model that I have as my on-site backup, is already end of life for security updates. So I'm working around that at the moment by keeping it in its own VLAN where only the backup service can talk to it. I'm relatively comfortable with that because it's like a third backup location. And then the one that I have offsite, actually, I believe is going to come to end of life in the next year or so, because it is the year after the one that has already come to end of life. The problem I have is a chicken and egg situation in that because I'm using their backup solution, if I change any one of these 3, I also effectively need to move to another backup solution. And the thing that would make the most sense would be to just bite the bullet and move to ZFS. I have an N100 ITX PC that I use for some testing already at home. I think we spoke about that in a previous episode. I could just go and put the 12 terabyte disks that I've currently got on my on-prem Synology into that machine. But then I have 2 other Synologies as my on-site and off-site backup that I'm still not comfortable at some point I won't have to replace.
Is there something else that you could run on those Synologies that you could use as a backup target, like Borg or something in a container on top of the Synology? I don't know how any of that works. Do they let you run workloads on top of a Synology?
So they have their own app store, which you can get stuff from. They also have VMs that you can run on them. So that's one potential option, is to pass the storage through NFS into a VM that's running on the machine. Or the other option is that they can run Docker locally, but I found their implementation of Docker a little bit flaky and a little bit strange, to be honest, because you have to do it all through the web UI, which I would rather not do if I can get away with it.
Let's take it one step back real quick before we go down how to handle that. Do you even want to run the Synology OS still, or are you going to replace it with some sort of appliance OS like TrueNAS or Unraid or something?
I think at this point, I've had enough trust burned with them in the last year through things like you have to use our disks, or we're pulling H.264 and H.265 hardware decoding support from our products, that I'm not comfortable continuing to use their products or their OS. So for me, I feel like I'm kind of at a crossroads here where I either go and use some turnkey product such as TrueNAS, or I just roll my own on top of a Debian VM or an Ubuntu install or something like that.
Okay, so then we're definitely getting rid of Synology, but not quite Office Space. We're going to take it out back with a bat. Got it.
Yeah, that feels about it.
What about other similar providers? I'm thinking of QNAP, I guess. Or are you like burnt on all proprietary technology because there could be a rug pull from QNAP in a couple of years and you're in the same situation?
So one of the reasons I really liked the Synology was the wife acceptance factor of a sleek, small box with 4 drive bays in the front that I could put in the living room or put on a bookshelf at my parents' house, which is where my offsite backup sits. even with a nice ITX PC, that is still bigger and more clunky than going and buying one of these kind of off-the-shelf appliances. So I'm not closed off to these off-the-shelf appliances, but I do want something that is a little bit more general purpose in terms of hardware. So Ugreen was one I was looking at as a potential option, where they seem to have like a Alder Lake Celeron CPU and a standard UEFI where I can wipe the Ugreen OS and go and install my own operating system. So that to me feels like the preferred route to go down for things like my on-site and off-site backup. The box that sits in the garage is absolutely fine, right? It's in the garage. I only get to see it when I'm working on the car, so no one cares about that.
Gotcha. So you've got that hardware form factor you want, but with an open source operating system and platform to run on top of that.
Yeah, exactly. It needs to be general purpose hardware, but in a nice form factor, I suppose.
I was looking at some of the AOOSTAR. I don't know how you pronounce that, like AU Star or something, little boxes. I was only looking at the little 2-bay ones that are basically the size of 2 hard drives strapped together, but I think they have some ones that are 4 things. I was quite surprised by how much it costs, like at a home level, to buy form factors that are effectively just a chassis, low-powered, N100 or something, plus drive bays. That form factor seems to be quite expensive wherever you buy it from.
Yeah, that's the real turning point for me, I think, is that I'm pretty much decided that the thing in the garage is just this N100 PC that I already have. But finding something in that form factor, you're right, Aaron, seems to just double or triple the price compared to something normal. Like looking at these AOO Star ones, which almost look like the old Apple time capsule, like a tall cylindrical shaped thing with 2 drive bays in the top. That's still over $200 for an N100 with 8 gig of RAM and a 512 gig SSD. I don't even want the 512 gig SSD, frankly, but I mean, that's a big amount of money for an offsite backup. And this is where I find this a really difficult sell, is that then does become just buying a Synology territory, which I think is the trap I've fallen into before, where it's like, well, I could buy this thing from China, or I could go and buy this Synology with warranty with an OS where they sort all this stuff out for me for basically the same price.
Is there any initiatives going on, particularly after this announcement, to try jailbreak Synologies and stick something open on there? Because there's going to be a lot of people who are pretty smart running NASs rather than just plug everything into Google Drive. We're going to be very annoyed by this. So is there any murmurings of dissent?
Not that I've seen. And in fact, all of that reverse engineering effort almost seems to be the opposite in terms of getting Synology's OS to run on general purpose hardware. So there's a product called Exponology, which has been around for a really long time now. And that allows you to take Synology's Disk Station Manager OS, which is just Linux with a skin on it, and run that on Proxmox or run that on general purpose hardware, although I think Proxmox is their preferred platform to target. So actually, it seems like people really love the Synology experience and they just want to run it on hardware that is way cheaper. I mean, I've got a friend, for example, who runs this Exponology thing on a PowerEdge R520. So he's got a proper box with Xeon CPUs and 12 drive bays in, just running the Synology OS.
Never used this OS before. I'll have to have a look at it. Obviously, it's amazing if people are willing to go to this length to run it.
I think it is just a very easy turnkey NAS solution with a lot of nice integrations and a lot of nice applications. And that's what sucked me in 10 plus years ago, was I just want a nice box that I can put on the shelf and can do everything I need and run a couple of VMs.
And trying to figure this out, it looks like Synology kind of locks down its hardware. So if you're going to try to sideload another operating system, you have to go into the BIOS and disable quite a few things. Not ideal.
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult to both run their operating system on something else, and I think almost impossible to run something else on their hardware. And that's a real shame, because the hardware I already have, the DS920, is like a reasonably recent Celeron CPU with 12 gigs of RAM, and would be absolutely fine if I would just throw TrueNAS or something on it for my needs.
I did look at the TrueNAS boxes once upon a time, but again, it's quite a lot of money before you've even bought the drives to stick in it.
Yeah, and I guess drives aren't the problem, right? My big problem is going to be migrating the data I already have over to something new running ZFS. But I'm relatively confident that I can do enough data shuffling to do that without purchasing new drives. And then the 2 backups, I guess I can just go without 1 backup at a time until I've got the data migrated over. So I don't think buying new drives is going to be a problem, but it's the box to put them in. And that seems to be the thing that is actually quite tricky to find, where it's not terribly expensive.
What I'm curious about is how are you going to get your data from one box to another? Are you going to like just rsync it over for now and then it's on ZFS and then future systems you can then ZFS replicate?
Yeah, I think that's going to have to be my strategy, is just do one big rsync of the 14 or so terabytes that are on the Synology over to ZFS, and then going forward, ZFS replication to both the on-site and off-site box.
So it's not just a software problem, right? Like it sounds as though you're quite happy to stick an operating system, whether you're talking a Sigma NAS or an Ubuntu server with ZFS or whatever, to do the software piece once you've got this sorted. The big problem is really finding the nice form factor that sits in somebody's house that can nicely have drives in it that doesn't cost you $500 or $200 or whatever.
Yeah, the software I'm not so concerned about. I mean, I do a very strict separation of storage box and compute box at home, and that's generally been the pattern that I've followed. So I could just do a box with Ubuntu server on, but then it's a box running Ubuntu server that I've got to admin. I could do TrueNAS, and then I've just got a nice web UI to go into and add users and add things like NFS targets and things. So I'm not so concerned about the operating system, because once it's ZFS, I can play around with that, find something that fits, and just import the pool. So I'm fairly happy about that. The big problem is for more the off-site backup box than the on-site one, to be honest, because the on-site one, I can go and hide it under a sofa in my home office or something, and that probably meet the requirements. But the off-site one, where it is literally sitting on top of my parents' bookshelf underneath their router, is the one where I'd really like to have a nice, svelte, sleek machine that also has enough compute power to go and run a VM to run the Pi-hole that I've got at their house and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I ended up looking at that $200 box that fits the 2 SATA drives, because actually finding something that's in a nice looking form factor that accepts SATA hard drives and all the rest is harder than it might seem.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, the box at their place is an SSD for boot and 2 8TB disks in a mirror. So really the AOO Star box that you sent across is the ideal thing, but it feels a little bit pricey for what is effectively just a really low-end box in a slightly nicer form factor.
Is there any sleek mini PCs you can consider, or are they all too clunky?
Anything that fits 2 3.5-inch discs in is pretty clunky. Like, at that point, you're approaching desktop under the monitor form factor PCs, and it's just not going to fly in someone's hallway, right? For my on-site backup, that's not so much of a problem because it sits in my home office, and I don't care if I'm looking at a PC on the TV unit in my home office. But my family members probably don't feel the same way about it being in their hallway.
Yeah, that's fair.
You can get some nice looking ITX builds that can fit a couple 5-6 drives. The problem is the price. They're expensive, sometimes even more expensive than a whole entire desktop chassis.
Yeah, the ITX box I've got at home is in some kind of Cooler Master case and can fit 5 or 6 3.5-inch drives just across the front with 2 120mm fans pointing at it. And that's the perfect thing, but that is still like 2 or 3 shoebox size versus only just bigger than 2 hard drives, which is really what I'm looking for.
I looked at a whole bunch of nice looking cases when I was going through this whole thing for home, and I was going to stick it in my loft. And there were so many I wanted to buy with all the fancy little blinking lights and the ability to pull out your hot swap drives and all that kind of stuff. And then in the end, I cheaped out and just found something that could fit 10 hard drives in a big box. And that was good enough for me because I wasn't looking at it every day anyway.
Is it possible to just secondhand this and like just wait for home lab sales or something for a post for like an old Cooler Master chassis? I don't know.
Well, I was kind of thinking of waiting for something like last year or 2 years ago Ugreen NAS or something to come up, because they do fit that requirement of you can reload the operating system on them and put something on that is a bit more what you would want rather than the Ugreen OS. But I guess they're not particularly common because they don't seem to come up on eBay particularly often here.
I feel like that model's pretty new, is it not?
That particular one is. Their current one is, but they have previous years' worth of models that do exist.
And yeah, you got a good shot. Yeah, just a matter of time.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing here is time is absolutely on my side. And my on-site backup box, sure, that is end of life. But as long as I find something to go and replace the box that's at my parents' house, I already have the hardware for the on-site machine. I'll just repurpose my lab box. Then as long as that happens in the next year, I guess I'll be okay.
I think this is a great part of the show to ask, dear listener, please send us your recommendations because we got very little.
Yeah, other than Aaron's dodgy AOO star, which sounds like a word-generated business you see on Amazon.
Yeah, so if you do have any recommendations to help Gary and I guess all of us next time we're going through this pain, then please do send us an email at show@hybridcloudshow.com. It would be lovely to hear from you.
Can I interest you in a janky NAS?
So I actually was looking at those, the famed AU stars. Somebody who knows how to pronounce that, please do come and tell us, because you'll have to send a little audio clip or something. When I was last looking at these, it was the N100, but it looks like they've got a new version that's the N150. It's a bit of a shame in a way, because my hope was that the new version of these things would have the onboard AV1 hardware encoding, because my thought is that one day this fractal node case that's up in my loft and the associated dodgy repurposed micro ATX board in there is going to give up the ghost. And when that happens, my thinking was that I would take my offsite backup AU star and that could become my my Jellyfin box, right? And so it would have all of the onboard Intel QSV and all of those other bits and pieces. That would still be a pretty great option with either the N100 or the N150 as far as I know about the QSV stacks in those machines. But it's a shame that it doesn't have the onboard AV1 encoding, because that would give a nice codec upgrade to all my other devices that can decode AV1 in hardware but can't encode it.
Are you saying that over Plex?
No, I'm just using straight Jellyfin.
Oh, straight Jellyfin. Okay. Plex just got 265, so I think hoping for AV1 would be kind of rough. But yeah, Jellyfin would fit that boat nice.
I mean, Jellyfin's worked really well for me with just a standard Intel. I ended up upgrading. I think I had a Skylake or something, and I ended up upgrading the chip in it because it's a very old micro ATX board, and I think I upgraded the CPU to a whatever the minimum one was, which is still ages old, maybe the 6000 series or whatever that was, that had the inbuilt graphics that could do H.265 encoding, the HEVC, in hardware properly. It's got a good amount of all of that like tone mapping stuff when you're going from HDR, so it can do nearly anything you throw at it in terms of Blu-rays, UHD Blu-rays and stuff like that, all without kind of getting too upset. But yes, it still doesn't do the AV1.
Sounds like we can't solve your problem, Gary.
And this is why I bought Synology in the first place.
Just give in and pay the tax. They deserve it, right?
At this point, I'm just more ideologically opposed to giving them money than I am the fact that they want it.
100%.
I mean, there's been plenty of decisions I've made that have fallen into that bucket. Well, we don't seem to be making much more progress with your problem, Gary, so I think that's probably a reasonable time to stop. But if any of you dear listeners do have any help for the rest of us, please do write in show@hybridcloudshow.com. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Until then, I've been Aaron.
I've been Gary.
I've been Sean.
And I've been Shane.
See you later.